This entire time, I had been doing product without knowing it. No one had given me that title. I had to go through all the tasks and secretly look at people's product briefs, see if I could replicate them. I straight in and did work. I learned to scope things, but I also led with the stuff I had always done, which was I got into Figma. I was sketching up things. I was just writing out a story of how I could see this product being built and why we could build it. Details in pixels really do matter. UX really matters to us. So I was able to sketch that stuff out and translate that to engineers without having to do one product document. I completely relate to that way of writing docs. At the time, I thought that's how you have to write them, like the jobs to be done frameworks. I saw that everywhere. I tried doing that. It just never fitted me and it never fit. They just dropped me in and it was me just going through and they were like, figure it out. It was like 50 ideas. Where do I start? It was a week and hours of me going through each task, reading the descriptions and finding many of the ones that I had written and suggested. I'm going to do a whole relaunch of docs and you're going to lead it. I'm going to build you a whole team around it and you're going to be the first person at ClickUp with a team. So yeah, went from not knowing anything to within 2 months starting to put together one of the biggest launches. That launch, we put together a team and I had no idea about estimates. I didn't know how long things would take. I learned by doing, which is very different to how I felt about things before that role. I'm Dean Phillips, and I lead product strategy, like the whole strategy of ClickUp. ClickUp is a work management and productivity app designed to house all your work in one place and help teams bring everything together so they can create their best products. My background isn't actually in product. Around 5 years ago, I ended up emailing the CEO of ClickUp, sending him advice. I was heavily involved in their community where they solicit feedback, and we also have a Facebook group. I was super passionate about the topic of work management, project management, tools, tech, all that stuff. One day, CEO, some ideas I had, I put together this giant deck about how I could see their docs product coming together and all the gaps in the market. This was purely from a user's perspective. I sent it. I was like, you should execute this. Please do this. The response was, this is amazing. Do you want to come and execute it with us? I was really surprised when I got that because I didn't even know that was something you could do. Now I realize product is a role, but then I had just been creating products my entire life for the last 10 years or so. I had a design agency, and a big part of that was putting together product systems and selling websites, packages, essentially mini SaaS products. I'd also consulted for teams in the WordPress space. I was like a CTO at an educational company. This entire time, I had been doing product without knowing it. No one had given me that title. It was a big learning curve when I went to ClickUp. But once I had that title of product manager, I latched onto that and just dived right in to figure it all out. There was no book for the way of doing it when you've not been taught it. I was starting from ground zero in such a big company.
If you look at my description of my time at university, I studied human-computer interaction, the discipline of software design. I had a lot of side projects very similar to you, WordPress installations, freelance website stuff. The whole time I was in that degree, I didn't know product management was a job. When I got into the industry, I'd be doing all these things I learned in design school that people were like, why don't you just be a product manager? I thought I'm just doing what a good designer should do. I realized the expectations of designers are super low in this industry. And that's why I started this podcast, kind of prove them wrong. Ironically, when you prove them wrong, you just end up taking over the product management roles at companies because a good UX is pretty good at prioritizing and understanding how to improve software. You having a very similar experience, at a well-known tech company, what did you have to unlearn? You mentioned it was a big learning curve going into ClickUp to do product there. Well, how did your experience benefit you? How did it hurt you a little bit as you learned about this formal product manager responsibility?
That's a great question. I really struggled when I first joined because I had always been a one-man show in many ways. I had led teams, but I was always the mind behind everything. I was very much a perfectionist in all the designs. I was really in the details of everything, building everything myself. And when I joined ClickUp, there was this whole team behind me who I then had to guide instead of doing everything myself. I could code, but I couldn't code, ClickUp. They'd be like the tech stack and everything they had. I didn't even know from the end and back end then. I was, like I said, WordPress engineer. That didn't really come into my area. I had to really learn how to work with designers, engineers, actually writing scope which translated to other people reading it. I'd always written things with the idea of bullet points, with the idea of what I wanted to bring to life. I was good at giving feedback, which has led me to this job. Working with other people was really difficult at first because I wasn't used to it. I was always in this idea of, I'm going to be caught out. Everyone knew that this was new for me. It's a huge company. We had just that week acquired funding. I think it was our Series A at the time. I was like, this company's huge. These engineers, these designers are all really experienced. And here I am coming in, trying to translate things for them. I struggled with that because I'd never written anything before. I had to go through all the tasks and secretly look at people's product briefs and see if I could replicate them. I would also ask people that they were surprised, some of the questions I was asking because I was very new. I didn't find anything helpful online, to be honest. Most things about product were very much about project management and running it in more of the agile sense and a very traditional product-led background. But ClickUp was very different. They hired me, a guy who didn't have a product manager background. They hired me for my experience in and intuition in design. But that's kind of all I had to go on was my gut. I dived straight in and did work. I learned to scope things, but I also led with the stuff I had always done, which was I got into Figma. I was sketching up things. I was just writing out a story of how I could see this product being built and why we could build it. As I mentioned at the start, when I pitched Zeb, I was doing it out, something I wanted to see. Turns out I'd done a lot of what a product manager would do. I'd done competitive research. I'd looked at the market and done an analysis. I'd even said what features and benefits, why they should build it. I was essentially trying to sell Zeb, the CEO, and ClickUp in general, why they should build this stuff for users. I kind of had that intuition, but I didn't realize how to do that when I first joined. I didn't realize that is what I have to do, if that makes sense. So I would say that was difficult, but a big benefit was what I just said. So much of it came natural to me as well. You mentioned your design background, your UX background. We're very much a UX-led company and a UI-led company. Details and pixels really do matter. UX really matters to us. So I was able to sketch that stuff out and translate that to engineers without having to do one product document. I was using Loom years ago to get my ideas out, and that came very natural to me, where apparently that isn't how other PMs in the company were working. They were doing these long documents where I was never going to do that because it wasn't something I was taught.
It's a weird muscle for most people in the corporate world to communicate with. When I started getting encouraged to do more product strategy and product management, I was looking at what the other product managers were doing. They're just writing these 6-page essays that I know nobody was reading. I was their designer and I wasn't reading all of it. I was at best copying and pasting into chat to summarize it. It's ridiculous. I have a similar style where it's more about giving one pager briefs to the design engineering team. Being a designer, I don't want too much detail. I need to understand the high level. What are they trying to do? Some research leads for me to find out how to do the design research. To be the product manager I would have wanted in my career is at having more piecemeal
Mm.
discussions and insights. Do you tell me about the first 90 days there? You started as a product manager, but now you're currently head of strategy.
Mm. Yeah.
What did that journey look like? Because it looked like you did okay, like imposter syndrome and all. Like, how did you continue to grow in that role?
I completely relate to that way of writing docs. At the
Yeah.
time, I thought that's how you have to write them, like the jobs to be done frameworks. I saw that everywhere. I tried doing that. It just never fitted me and it didn't fit any of the team when we actually like ended up discussing it. When I started, that was actually kind of how I learned. Like I said, day one, I met up with the team, and at the time, I think we had 3 other PMs on board. So there were people outside of me. And we jumped on Zoom, and it was like, Dean's going to be leading docs. As I mentioned, we have about 10, 12 features in one. It's a huge platform, a lot of features are managed. PMs are jumping between, doing a bit here and there. When they brought me in, they were like, you're focusing on docs. I was the first person to have that focus. So I think it was a huge benefit to me. I was able to dive in and fully focus on the UX, the competitive research, talking to people about the docs product. I would say like 30 days, it was just me going in. There was no onboarding at the time. They just dropped me in and it was me just going through, and they were like, figure it out. That's how it was. Figure out what we're going to build to take docs to the next level. I had the background in using the app, which is how I was able to, I didn't have to do all the onboarding. We're trying to figure out, there was like 150 tasks in there, 150 ideas. Where do I start? It was a week and hours of me going through each task, reading the descriptions and finding many of the ones that I had written and suggested to them. This the Dean guy suggests this, really good idea. And I was like, okay, cool. They are taking that feedback on, they're listening. But from there, I was like, well, how do I take this from like, I didn't even know I had engineers, like who to talk to. They then eventually told me where to go, which was, we had one engineer at the time working on docs, which is crazy back then.
What year was this?
This was the start of 2019, around
Wow.
2019. So we didn't have a ton of engineers, which a lot of people expect us to have, but we didn't back then. We had one engineer working on docs, and they paired me with him. As I started to get into it, 30 days in or so, I started to have weekly calls with the CEO. He became my mentor, going through, what have you worked on? What are you thinking? How are we thinking about shipping? And we started with quick wins. I had some ideas of things I had seen over time. Writing was a big passion of mine, so I'd use the editors. And I was like, we should do these quick wins. After 4 to 6 weeks, it was like, we're going to do a whole relaunch of chats. We're going to do a whole relaunch of docs. And you're going to lead it, and we're going to build you a whole team around it. And you're going to be the first person at ClickUp with a team. So it was really fast to go from not knowing how to scope, not really knowing how to work with engineers. I remember when I got told the words front end and back end, I don't even know what they mean. And I had to ask the engineers, is this a front end task or back end task? To us putting together an entire team within 6 to 8 weeks. So it was very fast. And
Very formative career experience too, because being an indie coder, you don't actually know the difference because you're doing all of it. You're doing the
yeah,
front end and the back end. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I'd done all the database stuff with WordPress. I just didn't know there was a term ahead with a designer, and it was like, he is your designer. You're pairing on this project together. You're working with him. And it's your project together. I was like, I was sketching stuff in Figma myself, putting it all together and sketching marker sketches to kind of put down ideas. I finally had a designer then. He's an incredible designer. He's still with us, and he's an amazing designer who straight away when he came on board was able to just grasp the vision I wanted. And I was lucky I had someone who just kind of had the same taste as me. That allowed me that I didn't have to do long documents, so it really flowed with me. When I was originally doing them for the first 4 to 8 weeks, I was doing jobs to be done in gherkins. But then it came to this actual, like, you're going to launch docs. I was like, let's get into how I want to work, which is visually. I like to see things. We jumped on some calls. I'm very much an async person, but I didn't know that about myself then. So it was like, yeah, we'll jump on calls and discuss how this is going to work and build it out from there. So yeah, went from not knowing anything to within 2 months starting to put together one of the biggest launches. That launch, we put together a team, and I had no idea about estimates. I didn't know how long things would take. So when we got together, it was like it would take 6 weeks. Ended up taking a really long time, 3 to 4 months. That is because it was a whole new team. We didn't have an engineering manager. We eventually got one halfway into that project, but it was me doing the EM role, the PM role, working with the designers and having to learn how engineering works and QA works all within a short period of time. So I just got dropped right in the middle and had to pick it all up. And I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, you're you're the personification. Marty Kagan's recent episode on Lenny's podcast about product managers. Usually, the best product managers aren't the product managers. In your case, it's this guy Dean from the forums. He has great insights into product, and I think for anyone interested in product management, what I see in your story is it's a leadership role. You don't have to know all these frameworks. You don't have to do user stories. A lot of it is a leadership role and a competency. I'm at the point now where I just don't believe that product management is a discipline. It's a competency. Like saying that project management's a discipline. We don't hire project managers anymore. You're just expected to manage your work. Good designers should be able to manage their work. Good PM should be able to manage their work. Product management is, if you want to do this, you need to be able to be dropped into an ambiguous space and then influence people, influence the designers and engineers, let them, we're going in the right direction. Here's why. That isn't something you study in school. It's not like a hard skill. It's this element of taste.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like a good product manager, and I've seen many now in my time at ClickUp, the ones who do the best and build the best things are the ones who have taste. I think it really is something where you want to build great stuff, intuition in a way. I really believe that. My background was design, and I wasn't the best designer, but I knew what good design looked like. Creating stuff moved me. So when I got dropped in this, I was like, this is such a cool opportunity to be able to create stuff. And that's kind of the lens of why I was so excited. I got to create stuff with incredible engineers and designers. We were a team building a product for millions of users. I want to build this and share it out. We got good feedback from people inside the company. To me, it was an intuition thing. It wasn't something I could have learned in a way I did it. I also could have grown as fast and picked up so many skills if I was trying to learn. I learned by doing, which is very different to how I felt about things before that role. I was a textbook guy, courses guy, and this time I didn't think about any of that because I couldn't find stuff which fit.
Yeah, you had to empty your cup and just learn on the job. I think, well, there's a joke that if you find someone that's really funny or like a comedian, they had some kind of trauma. It was a coping mechanism they developed in childhood. When you find someone that has really great product sense, like great intuition, you look at their background and it's a lot of side hustles. It's just this eagerness to learn. Could you give us a little bit of a background? We were talking at the beginning, maybe I think before the recording, about how you're calling from Manchester, and that's pretty far from San Diego, where ClickUp is headquarters. I live in Utah, which, I mean, ClickUp does have an office here in Salt Lake City. We started our careers not being able to just go out of college and go to work at Meta because it's right like down the street from our university, right? And so can you talk a little bit about what life experiences and things you did in your spare time as you were growing up that you feel helped you make this transition like as smooth as it could have been?
So I grew up like wanting to be a musician. I've been playing music since I was about 8 years old. I'm not going to say how old I am, but that's a long time. I was always really passionate about creating. I remember when I grew up, I was writing lyrics before I could even play an instrument. Probably even at like 6 or 7, I would scribble lyrics. I actually found them later on in life. They didn't make much sense. But I had this creative like spark in me where it's like, I want to write. I always want to be creating. And as I grew up, that was something I latched onto. My creative spark, my deep focus time was when I would get the guitar out and I would just write songs or, the piano. I remember hours and hours going by every single day. I was obsessed with getting that instrument out and just getting lost in there and learning things and writing things and being able to share it as well, which is exciting. I was very much an introverted kid, but when I was able to share, it felt a magical part of me where I was able to, I don't know, like be myself, be seen. So music was like such a big part of that. I actually went to university for produce music for people. I did that selfishly because I wanted to produce my own stuff better. I wanted to learn the technology side of things. I had a dad who was very much into tech and into music. I thank him for really influencing me into that side of the world. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have got into tech. But I started learning how to produce music and things. At that point, I didn't really enjoy working with other people at university. I was starting to see that maybe music wasn't really a career. But at the same time, I was starting to get into design. I remember Adobe had Adobe News out at the time, which I think is discontinued now.
That's a deep cut, man.
Yeah.
Wow. I used
So
that in
like,
college. Yeah, it was the
yeah,
coolest thing
so
ever. I was going to be a Muse developer.
yeah, I remember I developed websites using Muse actually. That was my transition of like music, okay, that's kind of not working out, but I'm not getting paid for that, but I can probably get paid for web design. So I started doing web design with Muse. I continued doing music as I continued doing web design. And I started to get hired more as I started to, build these websites, get some like design chops. And I started then getting hired more for technical things because I started to learn stuff to do with like automation, stuff to do with, like UX, like email marketing, all that stuff to try and grow my business at the time. But then as I started to grow my skill set, people started to hire me to do it for them. I wasn't the most successful with it all myself, but I was able to help a lot of people grow their businesses. That then got me into more of the operational side. I had to work with people and their clients. As I started to grow my clients, I needed a place to organize all the work and communication that I was using with them. That's how I started to transition into learning all these apps. Went from music to web design, to
Yeah.
organizing and doing all that stuff. And I remember the first time I used Loom with a client. To me, I was in this world of this bubble of this is normal. I remember when I sent it this was in the music side of the world. I was still doing, kind of dabbling in a little bit. I have like this tech mindset. And then I remember sending a Loom to like a producer and he was like, what is this? It's like, oh, okay, this is a different world. Like,
Yeah.
getting into all of that. So I then decided to fully go in on more of the operational side of things as I started to build out a design agency.
Wow. A lot of parallels to my personal story. I wanted to make movies, and that's what I did growing up. I was an indie filmmaker. It was just the idea that you have an idea in your head and you want to see it become a reality. So you'll do whatever it takes to do it. First starts with learning the tools and then like, well, now I need a website to promote this. And then you're like, oh, well, I don't like how WordPress.com I have to like buy themes. So I'm gonna learn how to code. You start stacking these skills. A lot of the best people I know were just hacking their way towards funding their creative passion. And then they found
Mm.
out, oh, this is actually fun. And then you realize like, oh, like the website's not going to drive business. Like you also need to like figure out how to incorporate some SMS platform to hook the form up to. And then you start thinking about the holistic tech stack. And then you got to think about operations and change management. And it starts snowballing into this slippery slope of becoming a product manager. I love how you segued that into it led to me eventually using ClickUp and becoming passionate about ClickUp. And then I ended up being head of product strategy at ClickUp. They thought the PM is the boss and the PM's job is to drive clarity of thought and also like bring in like all these different data points and like tell a story of like it's almost like you're getting paid to be an extrapolative thinker. And extrapolative
Mm.
thinking for those who don't know is like being able to take a lot of like different data and use abduction to like make connections that are unseen. It might not have like 100% evidence, but it leads to an insight. That's what good product managers do. I don't care if you write a 6-page narrative doc. Also, we stopped doing that because the whole impetus was, oh, well, they do this at Amazon. I'm like, yeah, the VPs at Amazon do that. They have time to do it. You're an IC. You're not having meetings with Jeff Bezos every week. Like that is taken out of context. Your job is to drive clarity of thought on a relatively small team compared to the rest of the company. And but like I feel like that's how like ClickUp, because I use ClickUp a little bit for my podcast. I thought it was really great. I was like, man, this Docs product is as good as Google Docs. So it's cool. I'm a little starstruck, like meeting the person that drove the improvements on it. My first insight is, how do you do something like that? One app to kill them all. It's okay. It's HubSpot. Like, do everything kind of like mediocre, but like it does everything. When I
Mm,
look at ClickUp, it does a lot of things very well. It seems like the insight is these are the core workflows of any corporate. What's the origin story of ClickUp? And then how do you manage all these different product lines and functionalities and code bases for all these different features?
mm,
Because I think the insight behind ClickUp's correct. It's like, hey, we have enough precedent for these online cloud tools that they shouldn't have to be separate tools. Oh, very ambitious to build that many features. Before the interview, we were talking about the new chat release you have coming up. What like is the origin story of ClickUp, and why was the founder so bullish that we could pull something like this off when Microsoft's tried to do everything and it sucks?
Zad, the founder, he had used like many different tools just to kind of do his day to day of work. We have a Trello board, Asana, Todoist, Google Docs, like Google Drive, like all these different apps. And he was like, got really just fed up with jumping between them. So he thought, well, I'm going to solve this myself. He had ran some businesses and, he needed to like bring all these systems together. That's how ClickUp was built. He and a bunch of engineers who were working on the apps at the time decided to pivot and build it for internal use. And that's actually how ClickUp started. So it started as an internal tool. There wasn't an intention of it becoming a large company like it is now and actually selling it for use. But as it started to use it, started to get people asking, like, can we also, can we use that too? That sounds like something we could do. And at the time, we did have, like Asana, for example, you could only do like a list view at that time. And ClickUp was the first one to say, actually, we're going to allow you to do a list view and a board view. We were the first to do that. Now that's kind of table stakes, but at the time it wasn't. People said like people didn't really use slash commands, and slash commands, in tasks, we kind of had seen it in things like editors, and so then they built that. And ClickUp, we were like told we were crazy for years. You can't have an all-in-one app, just not possible. And you can't have an all-in-one app of features which are 10x features. Everything has to be kind of average. You can't make them great. We were told that, and we were also told it's not the way forward. Separate apps and like maybe just bundling them apps, like some companies do. They're not actually talking to each other, or it's just linking to them. And we were told this wasn't possible. So you know, did the right thing by going all in one. And now we're really seeing that, especially now, like the more you have in an app, the less toggle tax there is. The more like you can actually have the data speak to each other, especially with AI. Like it's really, really like a benefit now that people are able to have all their work in one place. At the time, it was more for the toggle tax reason, which is like you don't want to jump between all these different tools. You shouldn't also have to pay all these bills for all these tools. Like I said, ClickUp has like 10, 12 tools. Imagine paying 10 to 12 different bills, which sadly some people still do. And now we're seeing it with AI. All your information is in one place. You can leverage that knowledge across the workspace and really search for everything and bring all the context into one place. So I think it was definitely the right choice to go all in one, even though we were told like it wasn't. And I would say like that's to be able to manage. You asked me how do you bring all them pieces together, and with when you've got like 10 to 12 different apps, how do you see the big picture and make sure they go together? It's very much what my role has grown into now. I lead the product strategy. It's my role to oversee every single team, every single feature, and like stitch them all together and make sure that we're building with everything kind of coming together at the right time.
You're harmonizing everything.
That's a great way of
I
thinking
get
about it.
what a
Yeah.
great full circle moment that good for you. So yeah, I mean, with that many like moving parts, you probably need like a conductor type person at that point. I am curious to hear how you work with directors of design and engineering to make sure that they don't go off in different directions. And I guess like
Yeah.
the other, I'm assuming you also like are a HR manager with product managers. Are you like a super IC?
I'm a super IC. I'm not involved in the managerial side of things. That was by choice. I wanted to be deep into the weeds, helping all the PMs and designers create things and
Ability,
create. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. It's also just more for like my personality type as well. Like manage the manager side of things was never really for me. I always wanted to create great products. Even when I had a design agency, I didn't want to manage a team. I wanted to create things with them. Help like work with the designers, work with engineers, even though it was a very small team.
Yeah, you
Uh,
wanted to make a band, right? That was
yeah,
probably it's just like I like the lead singer, like everyone thinks lead singer is like the one carrying the everything, but if you don't have a good bass line and all that stuff, the lead singer is not the boss, you know?
yeah, I love that analogy. So we have what we call how we build. It's a system we put together when I took over as the head of product strategy. We went through many different transitions in my time. We've had a lot of layers of management. When I first started, we didn't have PMs. And now it's me and the CEO leading the product strategy. We've kind of collapsed the org. So we wanted to build a strategy which made everyone work together and we have checkpoints. A big part of how we build now with all these features is we have different teams. We have the docs team from when we first built, we did the relaunch, but then we have teams for different areas like tasks, the chat with the new chat launch. It's my job to bring a vision together for each of those areas that ties to the greater vision of like ClickUp and where we want to go. So I work with like the PMs and the designers. We have them paired to each team. And I work with them to come up with like the vision that ties to some of what I call like big rocks. We have big rocks throughout the year, which lead the strategy of like a roadmap. We don't do a typical roadmap planning process. Instead, we have more of these boulders, like I said, and we come up with a vision which ties to them. So I think I mentioned I'm very much an async person. So we do some of this brainstorming asynchronously on like a whiteboard. We kind of sketch ideas out, do some back and forth, like clip videos, and then we eventually do meet and we kind of digest the entire amount of information, which includes use cases, benefits, problems, designs, competitors, and innovations. So that's kind of my main building block of how I work with people is doing that. The roadmap planning takes into account a lot of things throughout the year, but the main kickoff with each team is a vision of where we want to go for this specific area. And from there, it then goes to shaping the work with the PMs and the designers. And then it goes to them to go away and do that thing with, getting the UX together. And this has really like helped us minimize a lot of the writing and back and forth because a lot of the work is done up front, like the vision, the use cases, the problems. So when it goes to the PMs and the designers, they're able to go away and enjoy creating things together. Then they come back and we review the UX together.
So how do you be this head of product strategy that has no formal authority? It's a completely 100% influence role. You got the backing of the CEO, which helps. No one wants to
Yeah,
get on your bad side, but how do you empower your teams to feel like they have the agency to solve problems proactively while knowing that they don't 100% own the strategy at a bigger level?
that's a great question. We struggled with that at first. Naturally, we wanted to get everyone involved, give them autonomy to like collaborate with me on the vision and decide. So it's very much like a collaboration now in that start. They're able to go off and do their thing as well. But I'm also one of the most senior members in ClickUp, which I've been here the longest now. And I've also done a lot of work, a lot of these vision documents, overseen pretty much all the launches over the last 5 years have been led by me. So I think like the team has, seen that I do all that as well. And they trust me to lead the way.
uh ClickUp being almost like a contrarian company, it goes against all the advice of what you're told you need to be when you're being successful. Like you shouldn't try to be everything to everyone from the get-go. Even MailChimp started out with a small scope and eventually grew as it was bootstrapped, but for some reason ClickUp is doing very well. I wonder if its success might be because it's so compartmentalized. You don't need a ton of overlap between the documents team and the task management team. Like they could actually run as like independent units because they're independent products. Like, how do you attribute, I don't know, like ClickUp going against beating the odds of trying to do everything all at once from the get go? And like, what do you think was the reason that you have you're doing everything, but the quality of everything you're doing is pretty high?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think up to recently, even the last 6 to 12 months, a lot of people said that this all in one app couldn't be done. The idea was there was like single point solutions. You had like your Google Docs, Google Slides, and Sheets. And there was this idea of bundling. You've got all the Google Suites, but they don't really talk to each other. The idea was that you build the best docs, you build the best tasks. At one point in time, that might have been the case. But now you don't tend to have people who do just one thing in a role, or a company that just writes documents all the time. I think as time has gone on, and we were quite early in this, as individuals and job titles and job scope has massively increased. The amount of things you have to do, and also things we want to do. As we see more possibilities in the world, the more we want to do, the more things we want to take on. And I think a tool really has to accomplish that these days. For example, you're in a document and then you want to spin up a drawing to flesh out this graph and idea you're talking about. Once upon a time, you had to send that to a designer who would sketch it, or you had to have a friend with like an iPad or something, would lend you it and you'd have to sketch it and screenshot it and put it in the app. But these days, we're very much expected to be able to do that entire flow ourselves. And I think that's a big reason why we've been successful, is because we allow people to still do end-to-end flows inside the app. Now, you mentioned things, a successful part of our product is having different compartments. You have the docs and you have the tasks. And although, like, yeah, I definitely agree, like having them separate is also a good thing. I do think the power and why we have been successful hasn't just been that we have a good docs product or a good task product. It's the fact that it all speaks to each other. And people tend to work in workflows. That's something we're really digging into a lot more as a company now. Is we have all these workflows that we do, but when PMs and designers look at that area, they're very single focused on just tasks, docs. So we've really started over the last year, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we're doing the simplification phase. A big part of that is actually leaning more into what makes ClickUp, which is the entire flow of how do I get a document and spin up tasks inside that document? How do I connect the document to a project? How do I spin all that up into chat? I think people are really wanting to unlock these full flows. The creative market has really boomed over the last couple of years. The no code people especially, and they want to create stuff. They've shown that it's not this idea of the master of none, jack of all trades. We're noticing people aren't like that anymore. They've started to gear towards tools which really allow them to do it all. Obviously, there's context switching and all that stuff, which is the big problem you're trying to fix. But I think the thing that excites a lot of people is being able to fully unlock them flows. And I'm really, really excited that we get to do that.
So, do you organize your teams around vertical integration? Like everyone owns a little bit of docs, everyone owns a little bit of chat, or how do you? I mean, you did speak a little bit to this. That's kind of what your role is to.
Yes. So we actually have teams. I mentioned earlier that I was the first person to have a squad, or team, should I say, and it was the docs team. That was a set of engineers who purely just work on this product area. We found that to be really successful because they have a lot of domain knowledge. They can get deep into the code, and we still operate in that way for the most part from a engineering perspective. And then we have PMs and designers who own more of a surface area. It's not just dashboards, it's the cards and the canvas that make up dashboards, which can be put in other places. We went from really specific to generalized teams, but they're still working as a team. On top of that, we have myself and Zeb leading the product strategy, who are able to see how all these teams fit together from a strategy perspective. It's our job to see all the pieces come together and to make sure everything's moving in the right direction. The reason we don't do like a little bit of here and a little bit of there, like people jumping in between, is just because I don't think you can gain enough context that way. There's a lot of lost context if you're jumping between different teams, especially if you're doing interviews on a specific area. However, we do get PMs involved in the product all hands, where it's an open session. We share work, user stories, insights, and analytics for everyone on particular areas and demo things. So we are still really into PMs and designers, not necessarily like branching out and working on a lot of other areas, but they do have the knowledge of what's going on. Everyone should have knowledge of what's going on in every area. We try to be as open as possible about what everyone's working on. With our product, everything touches everything in one way or another, be that like the code base or the design system or the product or marketing. You can't really separate things. You need to think of the big picture. So we try to bear that in mind all the time. And we have engineers do code reviews across squads and a lot of cross squad collaboration, even if we have teams building specific things.
Concept of be like slime mold. It's like AWS, there's literally the concept of slime mold is that it morphs to the needs of the business. It's for companies that are not Apple-esque, very Amazon. It's independent business units that don't talk to each other, but they're supposed to organize. So you could tell that there's like pretty incoherent like navigation. There's like 10 ways to do the same thing, but they're able to move fast. And I think that's great for like a utility like AWS. But when you're trying to support like a workflow, like an enterprise UX, in my definition, based off of, I wish I remember the person's name on LinkedIn, was that there's a difference between B2B SaaS and enterprise SaaS and consumer software. B2B is really just a utility that you pay for, and it's supposed to do the work for you, is like the promise. But like enterprises, it's supposed to augment like what you're trying to do. Like the metrics for enterprise is, can I do this task faster or this job to be done faster? With ClickUp, it's like, okay, the reason it's so popular, especially like you mentioned the low code community where people are using Zapier or low code automation tools. No, I don't think I wouldn't be surprised if there was like ClickUp consultancies that like would charge to implement ClickUp and tailor it to a workflow. Your guys' approach to like like a consumer like software is almost like a focus on the enterprise and making sure that like, hey, if I'm in a doc, can I start like a chat like thread about this doc from here? If I'm in chat, can I start a doc from here? No wonder there's that super IC that is just whose sole job is just focus on all this stuff. So like, how do you keep track of all this? And like how do you spend your day to like stay on top of all this, all these moving parts, and understand like what's more important, I guess, from a strategy perspective? How do you know we need to put start doc from chat in our roadmap?
Yeah. A good question. Obviously, it is 12 apps in one, as I said earlier. There's lots of different workflows and different priorities and different squads. So, it's a handful for sure. A while ago, it was many plates spinning. Like you're doing the AI, I was doing the AI and the cards and dashboards and docs, all these things at once consistently. But now we orient around some bigger visions as a company. We look at the year roadmap. It's a very fluid roadmap. By that I mean we're not promising like specific features. We tend to focus more on like the themes you want to unlock, and there are features that go into them, but the prioritization changes. I always have that in the back of my mind, along with a vision document and then a strategy document that we share out of everything we want to accomplish and how we kind of see the year going. I always am very grounded in that. That is just kind of my personality. I also have a very good memory. I don't have to write a lot of things down. I just have a pulse on everything. That's just who I am, to be honest. I wish I had a system for tracking that. I've been asked that a lot of times. How do you track when certain things are going out? And what certain people are working on. I just know. Of course, we have internal systems and the things that we share out every week, and the chats and the channels and the announcement threads we have, which I can get into in a bit, really help. But for the most part, it's kind of my memory to just remember what people are working on. And that is mainly because I'm so deep into that strategy at the start. I do work with every PM very closely to work on the vision for each of their areas. And I am reviewing things. Everything gets signed off by me and Zeb. And that also allows me to have my finger on the pulse of what we're working on.
That might be discouraging to the listener, but I'm of the belief that some people are just wired for it. Have you been diagnosed with ADHD?
That's a great question. I haven't, but I'm pretty sure I do have it. I
Because
haven't been diagnosed, but I'm starting to realize I definitely have that and have a, 12, these 12 areas for me completely manageable, where I don't think for most people they are. We do have strategies in place on how other people manage this stuff, but for me, it's just an intuitive thing.
so I've been like going in a rabbit hole once I got diagnosed as an adult. What I've always noticed is that some of the best systems thinkers didn't learn the skill of systems thinking. They're predisposed to it because ADHD is not a disorder like the name suggests. It's really just like an evolutionary thing. It's your brain's forcing you to be bored, and so you're so bored that like you're going to chase dopamine and like look and get immersed in a problem area. And this reminds me of an episode with I recorded with Brandon Mitchell. He's a principal PM at Intuit, and he talks about find the problem to be obsessed with. Now you don't necessarily have to have ADHD, but if you are obsessed with the problem and it's all you could think about, like literally, like it's almost like borderline unhealthy. Like you have to like your job is your hobby. Like making the product better is your hobby. Like that's a productivity hack because you are dreaming about it. You're staying awake because of it. Like it's almost unhealthy that's keeping you awake because you're like, oh, I have this idea, I need to write it down. And if you're obsessed with a problem, you tend to just remember everything.
Yeah, I think you just literally described me why, like word for word. I would say the reason I'm able to keep up with all this stuff is because I love it. I'm obsessed with figuring out and helping our customers. It sounds really cheesy, but I am. I'm really obsessed with just making the product better, and it literally is what I dream about, which I don't really say out loud to many people, but from a podcast apparently. But yeah, it's definitely the biggest. I remember everything because it's always in my mind. I'm always thinking about how I want to improve certain parts of the product. I'm always thinking about, like use cases that we haven't solved yet and particular problems people email me about. It will ruminate as I'm going for walks. I will be with my partner and have an idea, and I have to like voice note something. And thankfully, I have a very good very good relationship that allows me to kind of have that freedom. But yeah, it's been as we discussed, how I got this job was really from like obsession, and I think it's an extension of that. Just I work here now, and I'm obsessed about just building the best product possible. And yeah, it definitely has its benefits. I would say I've really had to work hard on getting the context out of my head and documenting things more and really sharing that information out. So that's something that I've worked really hard on over the last like 12 months, maybe 2 years, is documenting and sharing a lot of the stuff we're working on, the things that I'm thinking and trying to be a lot. I heard the term like, is it working with the garage door open? I heard that recently. And
Does it
like that
work
is
with?
people
Can you explain it a
that's
little bit
like
more?
yeah, so it means like people being able to see the work that you're doing as you're creating things. So if you
Oh,
haven't working with the garage door open is like if you're a musician, working on songs in the garage, like people who walk past can see what you're doing and you're sharing it. And they may not come in and say hi, but they can see what you're working on, and they kind of have that context. And that's something I've really had to work hard on because I would have a lot of things would just be in my head, and I'm not a fan of meetings, as we can definitely get into. Oh,
yeah.
yeah. So it's very. I've been trying to, and I have. documented a lot of the things that we're working on as a company, documenting that strategy, documenting, where we're going as a company, writing these vision documents. I whiteboard and mind map with every PM the vision and where I kind of see things going, where I used to very much not keep it to myself, but I used to not write and distribute information in a way where other people could understand it. Because to me, it was like it's in my head. I know how to get from A to B, but when you're leading product strategy, everyone needs to know how to get from A to B to C. So that's kind of the biggest shift for me over the last 12 months to 2 years.
What I've had to learn, because I just assume that people see it too, and so I'll just overshare and I'll just data dump everything, and then it just overwhelms people. This is happening right now. Like, something I'm working on actively is when I go into a meeting with a new person that just got hired, is telling them like, hey, I'm going to talk very slow and it's going to sound like I'm talking stilted because I am actively trying to not inundate you with data. I'm trying to give you a high level summary and then like let you ask me follow up questions so that you could go at your pace working with me. And it's pretty hilarious, but it's an endearing way to like build rapport too. I've noticed is like, oh, like this person's like really trying to temper a radical part, kookiness, if you will. And but I want to like talk about, you know yeah, like there's already been like there's already more than 10 products at ClickUp, and you guys have recently made a like internal chat, like Slack alternative. And I'm going to use a story to kind of set it up based off what we just talked about, because so like I saw this clip from Patrick Bet David. He's a business thought leader and made his money in the insurance industry, and he talked about, and also this is a bonding moment. We're talking about football or soccer because he lives in Miami, and he would take his kids to these football like tournaments, and like there's just one team that was just dominating. They were just crushing everybody, and their coach was like a pro like soccer player, and his son said like, oh, he wants to be like a pro soccer player, but like their team is like obviously like high school kids. Like they're not like going to go to the Premier League. And so he goes and like talks to like one of the dads of one of the kids in that like really good team. And he said, yeah, like what your team's really good. Like they don't lose. And he said like, oh, well, yeah, it's because every kid in that team is uh their goal is to be in the Premier League. Like that's all, this is all they do. Like, and he just talks about like the concept of being obsessed. And he was like talking to his kids and he's like, hey, like how bad do you want to be? Because like you're putting in a lot of time, but looks like you had to put in more time if you want to be like a pro soccer player. Like, are you obsessed? Like, is this just fun for you? Or is this something that you just like enjoy doing? Or are you going to be obsessed with the problem? Like, let me know so that I don't like spend all this money to just like subsidize a hobby. Like, let me know, like, if this is a hobby, like, yeah, you don't have to be like going to like doing practice every night. Like, you can just have fun doing this. There's other ways to have fun doing this. But like product management is like, or like product strategy or leadership is like an obsession based job. Like, it's not like, I think the famous like quote in the book Inspired by Marty Kagan is, this isn't a 40-hour a week job. And like a good week for product manager is probably like 50 to 60 hours. Now, does that mean like meetings? No, it probably means you're thinking about it, you're writing about it, you're doing deep work outside of the 40 hours of meetings that you have, because to get ahead and like be competitive, you have to be on top of the problem space. And so what I'm interested is like the rationale that went into making an alternative to Slack, where its whole company is around just chat. Like what led to that rationale to do that, and what's the behind the scenes story?
Yeah, where do I start? So we've before ClickUp Chat, which we recently released into beta a couple of months ago. we were using Slack. We'd used Slack for years. Like you mentioned, we built a Slack, essentially a Slack alternative. And we've been using like ClickUp and Slack side by side since I joined ClickUp. And then prior in my design agency, I use Slack there too, and also use Teams as well. So I'm very familiar with like the chat space, and I used to really enjoy communicating in chat. It used to feel like really fun to me, especially when you join a new company and you're like getting to know people and you're like being able to DM them and then chatting and adding you to channels. It used to feel quite exciting. But then as time goes on, I actually just noticed that it really becomes like kind of a crutch for just like the day-to-day work in ClickUp. And this was a big reason why we built it. We were spending so much time inside of Slack. We were using ClickUp, of course. Like, we use ClickUp and build ClickUp at the same time, which is a really, really cool thing to be able to do. It's really cool to be able to do that. But there was still this missing part of like all our communication was happening in chat, and people were like making decisions inside of chat. They were putting, having contacts inside of chat, like writing the follow-ups to meetings and things inside of there. They were sharing important announcements inside of there. They were kicking off discussions and like getting ideas inside of Slack. And we had all these tasks, pretty much all the same, like similar things that they were discussing inside of Slack. But the context like was completely missing. Like if I wasn't in these channels inside of Slack, and or people weren't adding me to this group DMs, and I'm like a stakeholder looking at these tasks, I had no idea these things were moving forward, or I had no idea decisions had been made. And not only that, is like I got really tired of having to jump between two different places. And I could just see how we were all starting to just get a little bit like, not probably a little bit, probably an understatement, like just super fatigued of having to jump between, having to tell people, I was constantly having to tell people, can you put this in a task? And I hated hearing myself say that all the time. We're in an incredible position where we get to work and create in our own tool, and people weren't doing that. So people, and that is because people love to chat. Like people love communication. Chat tools are fun, like I said, but there's also like a dangerous addiction to them. And people, I've noticed, just live in chat all the time. They completely live in chat. People have like literally another monitor which just has chat open, and they don't really leave it. So I noticed that a lot over time. Was like updates and context was completely missing. People were really burnt out. I also really felt like it was the first thing I was checking when I woke up, and the last thing I was checking when I went to sleep. And I was just living in chat. And I'm really fortunate that I was able to, because I'm an async first kind of person. I realized that over time when I first joined ClickUp, I did so many meetings, and then one time I was like, I I prefer deep work. So I started to kind of shift that. But I noticed over time that it was just harder and harder and harder to get that done. So like there's just so many distractions. And I actually took some time off couple of years ago for some personal reasons. And during that I was purely like async. And I was able to I didn't really go inside of Slack. I mainly spent my time inside of like ClickUp and writing these deep discussions. And I kind of just I kind of unlocked like focus, and focus to me is like a superpower. I got so much done. I was able to write all these visions. I was able to see so much more clearly. I was able to see the strategy of where we could go. I was able to like design, and I felt like I'd had this burst of energy and this burst of clarity come back because I wasn't constantly distracted. And I really think like distraction is probably like the number one killer of productivity. So I kind of, in that moment, I was like, oh, communication is broken. Like, and I had experienced this in every, like, so I've been, in several companies now, worked with a lot of clients. I've experienced it again and again and again. And I kept hearing them stories from people. They just live in chat. They don't do anything. I look at someone over someone's shoulder, in like a coffee shop, and they're just in chat. That's it. So I really, about 2 years ago, I wrote this document of communications broken. here's where this is like what we need to do to fix it, and here's how I see it going. And at the time, like we me and Zeb was super excited about this. We were like, yes, we feel this ourselves, but it wasn't really a priority for our company at the time. You know, this is before ClickUp 3.0. This is when we were having like performance challenges. You know, we'd hired like a bunch of people. We were kind of going for some corporate shift.
What year
So,
was
you know,
this,
we
by the
kind
way,
of
just to anchor the
this
story?
was like 2022, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. And I'd written that document and I was like, okay, this is a problem, you know, we want to solve. And then over the next year, you know, we kind of started to just feel it more and more. I kept like saying to people, put in a task. And I had like started doing some sketches and things like that over the course of the year. It was always in the back of my mind. And at that time, we really saw like some more async based tools come out, like Threads, which is no longer a thing, but this is threads.com, not meta threads. Twist obviously is another popular one. There's now like Campsite, I believe. But and Basecamp obviously like started to talk a lot about, you know, async work, and with their book, It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, I think it's called.
Yeah.
It's a great book. I
That was
really
a good
recommend
book.
it. But that book as well came at the kind of reading that book came at the same time as me having this, oh, communication needs to change. So me and Zeb really like strongly believed in that, and we had spoken to more and more people who then started to feel this kind of frustration when they were missing important things. And I remember we had done some designs with a designer, and they were just laying in Figma one day, and we kind of had these discussions back and forth. And then suddenly, this engineer turns around one weekend, and he's built a POC for chat, and just randomly like sends it to me and Zeb. And it's in that moment where like, okay, yeah, this is now feels like the right time for us to do this separate product path of chat and communication. And I can get more into like how we kind of, you know, how we led that. But it was at that moment, and it was the perfect time because it was exactly when the company had kind of fixed all our permit like fixed like our like data and performance problems. You know, we were shipping fast again. We were getting really good velocity, but there was still like this burnout happening. So it really felt like him giving us that POC was like kind of like a, I don't know, a sign to start exploring it again in
So,
proper detail.
so this is so 2022. You take off a couple weeks, basically like a personal offsite to reassess. ClickUp V3, if I remember, was 23. Was that?
Correct. Yeah, it was. It was October. I think it was October 2023 that we officially released it. Going off memory.
Yeah. So there's like it's about a year, kind of like marinating. I've noticed life advice I was given from a very wise person. They said that if it isn't a problem a year from now, it probably never was a problem. And this kind of sounds like that scenario. Like product leaders, a lot of like the focus of this podcast is to address a lot of the things I was seeing in my career, where every company I went to, like product leaders get like exited or they'd quit after 2 years. Like they just weren't obsessed enough with the problem, or they didn't have like the discipline to not chase a shiny thing as soon as it came up. Like
Mm.
having that, one of the ways that I bond with my dad, he's big on, this might be hard for you to imagine living in the United Kingdom, but in America, especially in a red state like Utah, which is the conservative party, I'm really using a lot of United States shorthand right now, so I apologize.
No,
Um,
I understand it all. Don't worry.
okay, perfect. The it's shooting, just like hit like tactical shooting and stuff, and I did this like 4 day like handgun intensive with him. And one, like during like the last day, they do this like shooting house like scenario where it's like, hey, there's someone in your house, your family's in there, and you have to like kind of like clear the house because the police aren't there. And the reason that they do this is to show how little you know. in like in a real environment, like you're shooting targets and like practicing like unjamming your gun for like 4 days. And so like I went in the house and shot a bystander, shot my like the sun target that was like being held as a hostage, like between the eyes.
Wow.
Yeah, like when it's like it's your breath. It's there's like it's basically like an upsell for this like training facility is like, oh, it looks like you need to come back for more training. But it was like this concept of like trigger discipline, where it's like being able to identify if something's actually like a target or like a priority before you just like fire your weapon in a very life or death scenario. And I just don't see a lot of like trigger discipline in the product industry. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
like look, pow pow, like start like using resources and like thrashing the roadmap and not having like the discipline to like protect the team. Stakeholders in the house, the police aren't here yet. You have to go get the stakeholder to stop like messing up your roadmap. That's like what I'm hearing here is like it took a year of like marinating product thinking, protecting the roadmap, making sure that you stabilize operations first and make sure that the product's reliable before you decide like this is still a problem a year later.
Yeah, there's a few reasons behind that, and so like to touch upon what you say, 100% agree. By the way, like I think if ideas aren't rare, like let's be honest, like ideas are always there. If they're a real idea which is worth doing and worth exploring, it will come back. It will come back. It will pop its head back up. It could be like 3, 4 weeks from now. It could be a year from now. It will come back again. I think you do have to toe the line. There is then longer term strategies, which let's be honest, like chat and fixing communication, like that's a big bold thing. And I'll talk a bit more about how we did that. But it's a huge thing to like undertaking to do that, right? But that is a long term thing of like, do we really want to do this? And a lot of people uh, kind of thought like, why are we doing this? Slacks works, as I've said, like, for us, and culturally it didn't. Like Slack as a tool I think works, but I think it comes with a lot of cultural problems. And by works I mean as in it does chat, right? But a lot of context loss. There's a lot of cultural things which need to change. I think personally, and I think we've done that really well. But then there is them spikes, which you do when you do need to shift in product strategy, where it's like, okay, we are going to put some extra resources on that. We're going to make a tiger team out of this because maybe this needs some priority. A big example of that is like AI. When AI came out, like everyone went to AI and did like this generative AI of like, now you can write prompts and things. We did that, and I think we did it in a better way. We actually provided like some helpful tools and things out of the box, but everyone kind of did that. But at the same time, we still moved with our regular strategy. We had a separate team pop up. We didn't actually go ahead and like move all our resources or completely shift the roadmap. So when we do these spikes, we don't actually tend to like we don't shift the story that we're doing much. We just like either pop up like a micro team, or we go, okay, let's sit on this and let's see if we can do it in a couple of weeks instead. So that's very different to how we used to be. Years ago, it was like up and down, like the traditional PM teams, where it's like, stakeholders, clients, and everything. You kind of shift things constantly for these bigger deals and stuff like that. But now we definitely prioritize our strategy a lot more, and it creates for a more like a better working environment, better product, more cohesive team. Like there's a lot of benefits to not constantly jumping around, and that comes down to us trying to like improve, not like improve our product, but also
Yeah.
just improve our company as well, which is a big reason behind wanting to build a chat product in the first place.
Yeah. So to wrap up this episode, um, and so like using like the last, 8-ish minutes of the time that we have scheduled, how did you guys fix communication? Like what's your thesis of like what was wrong with it? Like what did you do differently? And yeah, we
Hmm.
we could go from there. And then, also you could tie up any like loose ends that you feel like hasn't been said in this conversation. And I think that's a really good way to like end. Just like how does ClickUp chat better?
Yeah. So we built ClickUp Chat for different kinds of people. So we built it for people who love async communication and people who, like sync communication. We allow people to, have these long form announcements and discussions, and for people to really create these artifacts which are remembered for a long time and can be surfaced really easily. At the same time, for when you want to put out like fires or you want to quickly get a pulse on something, we allow you to do, like have chats, everything you would really expect from a chat product at the same time. Now that's kind of like the table stakes of where we saw like, okay, well, that's a bit better than like, a bit better than other products out there. But that's just solving, like just a little bit about how you communicate. And then we wanted to actually fix about like the whole context problem. So as I mentioned, when we add Slack, because if we had just created like chat and we were like, now you're having your chat, it's just literally Slack inside of ClickUp, right? So we didn't want that. We actually wanted to fix the context problem, which is people write decisions, people like don't close the loop on things, tasks get lost, action items get completely buried in an avalanche of like tons of messages, a fire hose. And we've really fixed that with like you can create tasks with one click from conversations and connect conversations to tasks. So like context is always like remembered. You can summarize entire threads and share the summarization in both tasks and chat. You can like soon, and we're testing this right now, like you can sync a thread between a chat and a task. So for people who mainly just live in their inbox and want to just talk there, or there's people who want to live and just chat. Maybe that is just kind of how they work. We all are different people, right? Everyone is now connected, and we deeply connected together. We also were looking at this idea of like you constantly ask the same questions. People ask the same questions, and you have so much of that knowledge inside of your workspace. Why isn't that being leveraged? So we now have that being leveraged automatically with AI. If someone posts a question and we know the answer, we answer it for you automatically, and we resolve the question and the thread. So you no longer have to like be someone who's watching a channel and just answering questions all the time. You can actually do this deep focus. That's just like some of what we did to kind of bring context.
Dean, thanks for taking the extra time to really dive deep into a very comprehensive story. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of this. So, yeah, thanks so much for coming on, and you have a good one. Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.